Hello and welcome back to my channel. I think this will be the first video you'll see in a while. I think my last video was my June TBR. I've just been in a bit of a Booktube slump, just not in the mood to film anything and just feeling a bit uninspired. And I'm not someone who then forces myself to make videos anyway. So I've just been writing it out. I've been reading some good books. I participated in another round of Wonderthon. We ended up dead last, but we had fun times anyway. I went on holiday to Montenegro with Karen and Heather, and if you want to see our adventures, Karen has made 2 really fun vlogs of that, so I'll link those down below. So yeah, I've been totally fine, just not in the mood to make videos, and I guess that's okay. I have been filming some clips for a reading vlog that I may or may not post because the vibes of those clips are still very slumpy, and who wants to see that? But this will be the first time I'm filming like a full-length video. So yeah, I've been thinking about what my first video back would be, because on the one hand I kind of wanted to start fresh and not look back too much, but then I also really like watching those mid-year check-in tags and like best books of the year so far videos. So I was kind of making up my mind, and then I got tagged in a video and I was like, great, someone else decides for me. I love that. So I was tagged by Camilla of Haste eBooks to do the mid-year celebration book tag, and I think she was also in a bit of a filming slump, and she also wanted to honor Alice in her video. I think most of you will know that Alice was a booktuber. Her channel was called Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. I didn't watch her channel myself, but I've seen her, but I've seen some of the Women's Prize plot along videos, and I was aware of her. But she very sadly passed away earlier in June, and Camilla wanted to do like a video to honor her and also take a bit of a more positive approach to the mid-year tag, and just celebrate reading and the Booktube community. And yeah, I think that's just a great way to get back into the Booktubes. And then I also saw Olivia of AV Club, who did her mid-year tag, and then she mentioned another booktuber who made a video about why she didn't like to use the term freak out for this tag, and I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, and I'll link them all down below so you can check them out. That's all to say that I really like this new rendition. The questions are still very similar, but I like that it's a celebration, not a freak out. Especially because I don't think anyone is actually freaking out that much. Okay, let's get into the questions. Question 1 is the best fiction book you've read this year so far. So of course I'm not going to be able to pick just one, and like the more books I can talk about, the better, right? I'm going to mention a few here, and then in the other questions I will mention some more that fit that particular question, but could also be used for this question. Right, so the first book I will mention is A Little Luck by Claudia Pinheiro. I have read Eleanor Knows, and this was the second book I picked up by her, and I can already tell that she's one of those authors, when you read the first few pages of the book you'll know you're going to be in good hands. It's about a woman who grew up in Argentina. Something happens and she left everything behind, changed her identity and moved away to the States. And in the book she has to go back to Argentina, and you learn throughout the book what had happened in her past and how it is for her to go back now. And I think Claudia Pinheiro is so good at building the tension and just giving you tiny crumbs of information throughout the book. It's not like a fast-paced plotty book with a lot of twists and turns, but just the way the arc is built in this book is so good. I love the writing style and the complexity of the characters. Would highly recommend this book. And then I also read The Postcard by Anne Berest. This was one of Melinda's of a Web of Stories favorite books of last year, so that's how it came on my radar. And I read this book literally in a day. And this is not a short book, I think it's over 400 pages. But I read it during Wonderthon, and I was on a train from London back home, so that's like 8 hours of traveling. So I had time to read, but still it had me gripped from beginning to end. I had plenty of other things I could read and other things I could do, but I still chose to read this entire book back to back. But that does mean I'm not sure I can give like a proper review of the book, because I don't remember it very clearly, just because of having read it so fast. But I remember it was really good. So this is a novel, but I think it's a book that walks that border of fiction and non-fiction. The author receives a postcard from 2003, and on that postcard there are only 4 names. The names of her 4, I think it was grandparents or great-grandparents, I'm not sure anymore, who were all deported to and then killed in Auschwitz. The card wasn't signed, it didn't have any return address, it just had these 4 names. So the author decides to delve into her family history, and this book is a fictionalized account of her family's history and also the author's journey in learning about her family. So what I liked about this book, or maybe not liked because it's a book about the Holocaust, but what I appreciated about this book is that we don't actually follow the family members who go to Auschwitz, but we are with the family members who survive, who manage to stay hidden, and so this book shows the survivor's guilt, that feeling of constantly being on guard, of being distrustful, of not understanding why you are still here when most of your family is not, and how that trauma is passed on throughout the generations. It showed me a side of the Holocaust I wasn't really familiar with. One scene or one part of the book that will probably stay with me for the rest of my life was when the survivors of the concentration camps were getting back to France, where this book is set, and the city had these hotels as a sort of shelter where they could get some food and clothes and medication, and then see if they still had some family members. And just the way they were perceived by local people and how they were met with often disbelief and disgust, and how these people who had survived very horrible places just couldn't deal with the transition to normal life. It's just not something that I had ever thought of how that might have been, just so completely overwhelming. Yeah, I think it's a very important book. Sometimes people will say they are tired or bored of World War II historical fiction, which I never really understand. Can you imagine what luxury and what privilege you have if you're able to say that you are bored of it. I mean, yes, take care of yourself when stepping into a book about the Holocaust. I can totally understand skipping it if you're not in the right frame of mind for it. But to say you are bored, yeah, I think it's always important to keep on listening to different voices, telling their stories and reading different perspectives, to remember and to recognize repeating patterns in how we treat each other as human beings. I think the moment we get bored, we are in real trouble. Okay, let's move on to the next question, which is the best non-fiction book you have read so far this year. I must say I haven't had the best year in regards to non-fiction so far. I read about 9 or 10, and the only one that really stood out to me was Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck. Definitely confirming again that Steinbeck is one of my favorite authors. So this is a travelogue that Steinbeck wrote in the early 1960s. He was at the end of his career at that point, having already written his most famous works, and he'd been living in New York for over 20 years at that point. And his idea was to travel the country and meet the people he'd been writing about and just get reconnected with the land. And that's what he does. He converts a camper van and then he sets out on the road with his poodle Charlie. And then he does what Steinbeck does best, which is writing about the landscape and the people he meets, and write about what makes people tick in different parts of the country. And I wish I still had a copy to read you some quotes, but unfortunately it got a bit too beat up while traveling, ironically. But I love how Steinbeck can take the most mundane situations and turn them into these really fascinating anecdotes. Yeah, I thought this book was really good. It makes you want to go out and meet people and go and see where the road takes you. I think anyone who has ever done or wants to do a solo trip would find this book very inspiring. Question number 3 is the best book you've reread so far. And we're not moving very far at all, because that would be Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. I read the graphic novel adaptation of this. I don't actually know if this is out in English as well, because I tried to look it up but I couldn't find it. The text in this version is in Dutch, but I think the illustrator of this, Rebecca Doremer, she's French. I think the illustrations in this are really well done. I think they really add to the story. Let me find you some spreads that won't spoil the story too much. So here we have the two main characters of the book having a conversation together. That's more of a close-up, and then if you've read the book, then you know rabbits play a big role in this. I don't know, there's another one that is a bit different but shows you a different part of the illustration style. Which is this one, which is a depiction of how the characters dream about their own place to live in. So that has like a lot of detail, small details, which I really liked. And this actually has like the full text in it, so it's not abbreviated. I'm pretty sure, at least. So if you don't know the story of My Sandman, it's about two ranch workers, George and Lenny, and they have been recently chased off their last workplace because of something that Lenny did, and now they are traveling through California again looking for work, and they have a dream to eventually own their own little place and live off the fat of the land, as they say. Of course, things don't go exactly as planned, but I won't tell you more because it's only a short novella, and I think it's best going in not knowing too much about what's going to happen. Although I must say, I have reread this several times, and I know what happens, and I know the ending, and still every time I'm like, oh no. Like I said about Travels with Charlie, Steinbeck's sentence by sentence writing is fantastic, and he has such an observant eye in writing people and interactions. And then I also have to mention The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien, which I am currently reading, so I'll do it as an honorable mention. So I first read this like just before the first movie came out. My dad had this big bind-up of The Lord of the Rings in the Dutch translation, and I remember he would reread that over and over again. He used to be a big fantasy reader of all those classic high fantasy of the 80s and the 90s, like the Shannara series and David Eddings and Raven Feist and all that. He doesn't read much or at all, I think, nowadays, which is a shame because I do get my love of fantasy from him, and I think it'd be great to be able to read together. Oh well, maybe I can convince him to pick up a book with me sometime. Anyway, let's get back on track. I read it in like 2 weeks because I wanted to read it before the movie came out, like the entire Lord of the Rings, not just the Fellowship. And then I read it again, the English version, I guess about 10 years ago, and I liked them, but I was always like, the Lord of the Rings is one of those cases where the movies are better than the books. Now I was like, let me try out that audiobook that Andy Serkis narrates, and it's brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant. I am hooked. And all the bits I used to find boring, like all the side tangents about the history and stuff, now I love them. It's like when in another book I will Google places and people and history and stuff, and with this, Tolkien's got you covered. He just puts it all in the book. And then the songs, the songs that you skip over normally, you skim them, but in the audiobook, Andy Serkis is singing them, and they're so good. The narration is just fantastic. I'm about 40% in right now, and we only just got introduced to Aragorn, so there's still a lot of new characters that I get to meet, and I can't wait to hear what Andy Serkis does for those voices. Yeah, I am completely gripped by this story in a way that I didn't expect, considering I had read it before. I'm going on more walks and doing more cleaning just so I can listen to the book a little more. So if you haven't listened to that yet, I could highly recommend that. Question 4 is the best series you've discovered so far this year. Pretty much by default, because I haven't read or started that many series so far this year, only 2 to be exact. And my favorite one out of those is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I don't actually know what the series is called. I only just finished this book. It's a fantasy story set in a pre-Columbian America. you follow 3 different narratives. First we have Serapio. He's a young man who was blinded by his mother in a ritual because she believes he is destined to fulfill a prophecy. Then we have Narampa, and she is the sun priest who lives in the holy city of Tova, and she is like the spiritual leader of the city type of person. And then we also have Shiala, who is a sea captain with some magical abilities, and then she is tasked to take Serapio to the city of Toba in time for an eclipse happening at the winter solstice because of things that are about to happen. That is the premise in a nutshell without getting into too much spoilers. Now, I like this fine. It got me out of a reading rut, but then again, fantasy books will usually do that. And there were some parts of this book that I really liked, but I don't think it's perfect. I really liked the world building and the setting of this, drawing inspiration from old American civilizations like the Aztecs and indigenous people of America, rather than the more conventional medieval European settings you usually see in high fantasy. I like how there's different magical elements in this book, drawing from the celestial and the elements, and I liked the role animals played in this book. I like how the author incorporated the different groups of people and their history and how they relate to each other, and I think she just built a really rich world in this book. I think her characters were interesting and had a lot of potential, but they could have been more fleshed out. We don't learn much about their past or where they came from, except maybe from Serapio, and I would love to learn more about the other characters as well, because the author lets us know enough about them that I know she has created these complex characters. They just don't come across like that on the page, if that makes any sense. I liked how the author put in an effort to have several queer characters in the book, but then the main romance was a very book standard heteronormative, seen it 1,000 times before, which I thought was a missed opportunity. And then I liked the pace the plot went along. It was quite slow paced, but I really didn't like the ending. So all in all, just a very mixed experience, but overall I enjoyed it, and I'll probably continue with the series. So that's my favorite series I discovered this year, kind of by default, but there we are. And I also read a duology I really loved. I just don't think a duology counts as a series, but I'll mention it anyway, and that is My Brother's Husband, volume 1 and 2 by Gengoro Tagame. This is the second volume. It's a Japanese manga graphic novel, and it's about a young single father called Yaichi. He's living in a suburban neighborhood in a Japanese city with his daughter, and one day Mike shows up at their doorstep, and it turns out that Mike is Yaichi's late brother's husband from Canada. Now I have to go on a little side tangent here because I want to show you something. I first heard about this book on Greg's channel of Supposedly Fun, and if you've ever watched his videos he does with his husband, have a look at this. So this is Mike. Now tell me, He doesn't look exactly like Joel, with Greg's beard and love of flannel thrown in. Please tell me I'm not the only one seeing this resemblance. Anyway, this was really wonderful. It's a story about family and acceptance. The main character goes on a real journey of him figuring out how to deal with the fact that his brother was gay and opening up his mind and his heart to his brother's husband. I loved learning more about Japanese culture in this book. I loved how the daughter brought a sense of lightness and joy to the story. Just overall a wonderful experience to read this. Okay, I feel like this is taking a long time. Booktuber is hard, you guys. Let me try and be a bit quicker. Question 5 is the best book that came out this year you've read this year so far, which is easy because it's none. Everyone should know I'm a backlist girly by now. Moving on. Question 6 is a book that took you out of your comfort zone, like a genre you don't usually read or from a book prize. I'd probably say Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, just because that book is hella long. And I definitely prefer books that are more on the shorter side. And I enjoyed this a lot more than I expected. Yes, it's long, and yes, it has some rather tedious chapters about farming. But overall, this was less the story of Anna Karenina and more the bold and the beautiful set in Russia, following the Russian elite. And I had a good time with that. Question 7 is my favorite new to me author for this year. I don't think I had a new to me author that immediately made me go like, I want to read everything they've ever written. But I've read some authors that I'm definitely curious to read more of their works to see if they could become favorite authors. The one that comes to mind is Sarah Baum. I read Seven Steeples by her, though I read the Dutch translation, so does it even count? I don't know. I thought her writing style was very lyrical and it had a poetic rhythm to it. It was quite sparse, but then still evoked a real strong sense of place. It had a strong focus on nature, and it was beautiful and reflective and just very atmospheric, which are all things I really like in writing. So yeah, I'm curious to see if she has that same style in her other books as well. Question 8 is the best book that lifted your spirits this year. I think My Brother's Husband is definitely one that lifted my spirits. But I'd say in general, I have particularly been enjoying reading books and listening along to the audio at the same time. I've had such a good experience with every book I have done that with this year so far. Two that I really loved were The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton and Tom Lake by Anne Patchett. And I loved that the way I read them really made me slow down and savor the books more. I don't really speed up my books, my audiobooks, more than 1.2 times speed. I guess if you speed them up a lot more, then it won't slow down your reading. But it did for me, and I think it made for a more immersive experience. I think I would have loved these books either way, but now the reading experience was just on another level, and I have been really appreciating the art of a good audiobook narration. Question 9 is my favorite booktuber you discovered this year. I haven't really subscribed to a whole lot of new channels this year, but one I do really enjoy is Chloe from Recovering Book Snob. She is someone who got back into reading last year after not really having read for a decade or so. So she's doing catch up on all the backlist titles that were popular for the last 10 years. But she also reads a lot of new releases and classics. And I think we have a pretty similar reading taste. And yeah, I just really like her thoughts on the book she reads. She's very insightful, and she also just has a really nice voice, which, I don't know, is that a weird thing to say? I just think her voice is very soothing. And then not a new booktuber, but someone who is back after a bit of a hiatus, is Andrea from Infinite Text. She is the geekiest booktuber, which I mean in the most loving way possible. She is just so unapologetically passionate about the topics she's interested in, and just goes all in. And I love that. I always get a ton of recommendations from her for books about topics I didn't think I would want to read about, but the way she talks about them so enthusiastically makes me want to read them all and learn all the things, which is probably her secret agenda, being a librarian. And then the last question is your favorite video you've created this year so far. And I would have to say that is Karen's birthday surprise video. I mean, the video itself, it's fine, it's nothing special, but I had such a blast planning the surprise, coming up with the idea and getting other people involved, and then on the day itself, waiting for Karen to see all the videos and her reaction. It was just the best, and I think it was a really successful surprise. And that was all the questions. I'm not tagging anyone because, the mid-year season is drawing to a close. But maybe save this for next year. Anyway, I would love to know how you all are doing. Please come and say hi in the comments, because I've missed talking to you. Thank you so much for watching. It's been lovely having you, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.